and welcome everyone to YNAP today. So, automating Jenkins, a little Ansible magic. I'm sure we are all familiar with how much fun it can be to automate Jenkins. There are, of course, a number of existing efforts and projects and bits of snippets on GitHub all around the place. Commonly, people throw XML at Jenkins CLI or using the REST API, but you know, who really loves XML? Yeah. There's, of course, the pipeline DSL plugin, which is quite a common one that people use to try and describe their jobs in a slightly friendlier fashion and have it automatically create them. There's Groovy scriptlets, either run using the plugin Scriptler or abusing init Groovy entirely to create everything on start, and then, hey, you need to update something. Let's restart Jenkins and have it once again read init Groovy. These are all common ways, but for us, we needed something that was more runtime friendly, and that certainly didn't involve XML. The mantis shrimp. Who here is familiar with the oatmeal cartoon? Anyone? A hand, yay! So, this is our project mascot, the mantis shrimp. There is a long history behind why it got named that, but that's not for tonight. Why we engaged this project? Why did we do it? So, our existing Jenkins estate, it was unwieldy, it was fragile, there was lots of Groovy scripts calling Groovy scripts that called a Puppet module that promoted something, that did something else, and everyone was terrified of doing any kind of upgrades, any kind of plugin installs, and the overhead for our development teams when they needed a new dependency for their projects was fairly significant. They would raise a ticket, we would get that, we'd look at Perl whatever, or Python whatever, we'd see if it could be installed on the CentOS 6 servers, we'd find it couldn't be, we would give them a new one. It was a nightmare. So, starting from scratch, how can we improve this? One of our key principles, and it's held for the past 2 years, is infrastructure as code. I know it's almost become a buzzword, but that is an absolutely key, not just guiding principle for us. Everything, all configuration, when it comes from jobs through to just an SMTP server, sits in our Ansible code base. Obviously, we get audit trails from there, but more important, we get reproducibility, reliability. We know what's going on there. CloudBees has put a lot of effort into the past few years into what's referred to as workflow, the pipeline plugin. This uses something called a Jenkins file. Hopefully, given where we are, people are familiar with Jenkins files. And we wanted to leverage this. We didn't want any clicky at all on the Jenkins servers. So right from the outset, working with the development teams, it was a case of you're not going to have freestyle jobs anymore. We're going to only be doing Jenkins file workflows. Of course, this was, again, quite important to us, runtime changes. So where a common thing was an initd folder or abusing the Groovy file, things like credentials being added to Jenkins as a very common example. New users, groups, adding a new project. All of these things had to be done while Jenkins was up and running and with no visible downtime, and of course, audit trail, the usual. And of course, as part of infrastructure as code, testable, repeatable, reliable. We all know those words. They're hammered into us on every single day. With our Ansible code base, we're not going to go into how that gets tested today, but every single day, multiple times a day, we build fake Jenkins servers. We run through all of our Groovy code against the latest plugins, the latest Jenkins versions, make sure that all of our stuff still works tomorrow and on the next update and then update after that. So, when we approached this, the question was, which API? There are, of course, a couple of different ways of handling Jenkins. There's the REST API, which is obviously very stable, semi-well documented. They go through a lot of effort to keep it stable. But the problem is it's also limiting. You can't do configuration changes in there. You can't configure Slack or Artifactory or anything like that through the API, not the REST API. And of course, to create a job requires XML, which we hate and we want to get rid of. So the other API, which is varying on stability, is the JavaDoc API, the internal Java calls from Groovy, which of course, if you're using init.groovy, you'll know well. Although technically stability varies, particularly with plugins. The past 2 years, it's been pretty good. There's only 2 real occasions that come to mind where we've actually had to go to our Groovy code and update it to handle a change in behavior internally. That was when Active Directory plugin was changed, again a plugin change, and when they completely refactored the Bitbucket plugin for how Jenkins communicates with Bitbucket. So full refactor, not that surprising, a little bit of change had to happen. And of course, if any Assassin's Creed fans are here, the motto, nothing is true, everything is permitted, will be in your brains. Because the Jenkins documentation generally, when you're talking high level, how as a developer do I write a workflow, is very good. When we're talking, I need to do stuff in Groovy, to do poke the internals in a particular way, not so good. We spent many an hour on the Jenkins Javadoc website, checking methods and classes, seeing what they're meant to return, finding that actually it doesn't behave the way you expect, and then just going, sod it, GitHub, source code, what is it actually doing? Even things like restricted methods and so on, when you're running through the internal Groovy engine, it's all open. Everything's permitted, but you have to be fairly careful with your testing. So, how did we approach this? The first step towards it was, of course, the script text endpoint. I mean, that provides a nice, easy endpoint. You can throw a bit of JSON at it, sort of JSON, and get something back. And that allowed us to proof of concept something very quickly and showed us we were going in a direction that would work for us. But on actually trying to use it, it turned in that way, it turned out to be pretty messy. Most of it is surrounding HTML encoding into that little argument. When we're running analysis tools over our playbooks to see what modules are being called, of course, if you're just poking URI, everything shows up as URI, which is really unhelpful when you're trying to work out what's actually configuring or not. The actual output of Ansible was really messy with that. Lots of noise of things all over the place. And that, of course, isn't the whole story, because that call will still result in a status code 200. Everything's fine, even when there's a stack trace. So then you end up having to check the output, check for failure, and so on. So we knew we were at the start of a good journey, but we knew we had another step to take. So the next part of this was writing in Ansible as a module, Jenkins script. So this basically does what the URI does, but with a whole lot of error checking around it and complies with the Ansible module guidelines, so that it returns a proper status code, it will throw out a message correctly, and so on. And conveniently, just take the script with whatever the scripts are going to be as a parameter, and does some very basic Python templating. So to convert what is an argument in the file, so you can just pass in arguments. This was merged into Ansible 2.3 last year because we didn't want to maintain it ourselves. It made life so much easier. And it's a very core part of everything we do. But when taking this kind of step, when going on this journey, particularly when you're abusing internal Groovy and Java docs, there is something to be aware of, and that's getting on the treadmill. We as a team had to make a commitment to updates, particularly since we told the developers everything is Jenkins file, because Jenkins file is relatively new, of course, in the Jenkins world, relatively. There's been a number of bug fixes over the past year, or new features coming in. We need to make sure that gets out to the teams, and that when we raise issues with CloudBees on Jira, that when they're fixed, we actually get the fixes, as opposed to stuff hanging around. So, as a result, as I mentioned earlier, we have multiple times a day all of our Jenkins code being tested. Our Jenkins servers are updated on a regular basis to whatever the most recent plugins or Jenkins versions are. We have regression tests, which are actually our examples. We provide the developers on how to do things in Jenkins files. Those get run every night. They have actually caught problems in the past. The security filters that were added to Jenkins a couple of months back, JP200, that broke the Artifactory plugin, which was a lot of fun. But we caught that, and we were able to handle that. As part of this, if you take this road, if you start going down this journey, I can't emphasize enough, mock data is crucial. As I said, we rebuild multiple times a day in Docker containers, make sure everything works. We don't use our production code because we don't accidentally want things going to the real world. But within those Docker containers, there's a complete suite for every single bit of Groovy we've written to make sure that it all gets exercised. And dog food's yummy. Who disagrees dog food is yummy? Anyone? So where our platform is pushing this out to our Jenkins servers, at the same time, everything we're asking our development teams to do, and we're working with them in implementing, we make sure we also implement. That we do first, we know we can pick up the issues, and we make sure that we catch things early as a result. And that is one of the most crucial promises we make to our development teams. So, a live demo never goes wrong, right? I was going to do a live demo for you today, guys. I was going to. Unfortunately, we had some issues with Active Directory, and virtual machines that I had built, we can't actually SSH to, which is a minor problem, but hopefully you can see the screen. This is a live demo of our Ansible playbook that's going to run. You can see I've got a couple of virtual machines here. We've got a Jenkins node and a Jenkins master. Very Jedi-like. And from here, while I talk about some other things, we're just going to get going. So, what am I doing here? Verifying the IP address. As you can see, there's no Jenkins server to prove that this actually works. Our playbook. This playbook is on GitHub as of a few hours ago. And feel free to pick and do whatever you want with the Groovy scripts. They're there for funsies. So, this is using actual upstream. I'm going to cheat because I have the ability to cheat. And fast forward. No, I can't because it's an Impress document. Anyway, so this is downloaded from Jenkins. This is the latest code, latest plugins. Very important to us. While this is happening in the background, we have multiple Jenkins servers out there. Of course, we hit ours first. We hit development afterwards. We deploy in parallel. That's very important to us as well, and part of what we try and promote around the other teams. All of our Ansible, if you go down this route, whether it's Ansible or whether it's Puppet or something else, we make sure it's idempotent safe. We're always safe to run our playbooks. Part of that is being disciplined. It's really, really easy to want to just go onto a Jenkins server and add a credential quickly, add a project quickly. But as a team, we've made a decision that's not what we're going to do, and we stick to our process. And that's part of why we're able to deliver what we deliver every day. Jenkins, have you installed yet? Yes, nearly. While that's waiting, how about some pre-questions? Any initial questions or thought that people want until that goes? No one? Yes, hi. Why are we using Vault? Yes. Part of managing our secrets, we looked at HashiCorp Vault and we might switch to that. But for the moment, for our development teams, the key things we wanted out of credentials were not exposing a console log and not leave secret files like SSH keys lying around. The easiest way we could think of to do that at the time was using the with credential step in a Jenkins workflow. But to do that, they need to be in the Jenkins actual internal secrets. So as part of all of, whether it's authenticating to GitHub or Bitbucket, or whether it's putting SSH keys in place, or even AWS credentials, all of these are handled out of Jenkins secrets, and they're protected by being in an Ansible vault, which is unlocked during deployment. Ah, yes, it carried on. See, the video wasn't stalling. So, at the moment, Jenkins is fake installing in this video. You'll see plugins appear in a moment. Java, bane of my life. And so part of our initial steps, if you had a look at Jenkins script a couple of years back when it was first merged, the examples I had online on the Ansible documentation described using vars as a file to put things in. We found that a bit unwieldy of the time. So in the examples that you can look at afterwards, you can see we're using the lookup plugin just to grab raw Groovy from the playbooks from disk. and then we can maintain things separately. So here we are. It's going. Jenkins is starting up. And it'll come up in a moment, and then a whole bunch of plugins will install. Why didn't we have working servers? Any other questions while that's installing? Hi. Correct. So right now we have static Jenkins masters and Jenkins. Sure. The question was asked about Jenkins. From what is being described, we don't run Jenkins itself in a container. So yes, soon. Thank you. So yes, good question indeed. So as things stand right now, it's a static Jenkins master and static Jenkins nodes. On the nodes is a Docker Community Edition, and our developers build it within those containers on those Docker nodes. There's no executors on the master. We've been looking at containerizing the Jenkins process itself. The key questions we need to answer is how we handle varlib Jenkins. Whether we want to do it as a persistent volume, whether we're going to mount it from elsewhere, we don't know the answer yet. We haven't done that testing yet. And whether we're just going to use the upstream Jenkins container and just pull straight from Docker Hub Jenkins, or whether we'll build our own. That's an open question. We haven't decided that yet. Yep. No, we try as a team to avoid new and shiny buzzwords, as it were. And I know, but still. Yeah, if we're going to make a change, we want to make that change measurable, and so that we can show, yes, we've actually accomplished something with this. Whether it's easier releases and upgrades, although our upgrades take approximately 2 minutes with a nice little script, or something else. You know, it's something to actually promote as opposed to all the things the business wants us to do. So, plugins. Latest plugins get put in place. And this same playbook can actually update plugins as well. Jenkins comes up. It does some fun things. The one thing that we did bump into, which is a bit of a minor bugbear, is that obviously when you go to do a Jenkins authorization, you have to pick an authentication layer. You can't do local users and AD plugins. So there's some logic to handle switching between the two if need be, depending on the environment. Any other questions? Hi. So, 2 areas here. Our actual Ansible code, the Ansible roles. Oh, how do we actually test our Jenkins? So how do we test our Jenkins pipelines? So there's 2 areas here. One, our Ansible, we're quite strict with all our Ansible stuff being segregated into roles. Each role has unit testing. That testing happens within a container that basically does a full install into the container and makes sure that A, it works, that all the Groovy code works and can execute, and then B, afterwards, things are idempotent safe, so it's safe to rerun. Separate from that, as part of our promise to our development teams, we have a Bitbucket repo where we have a whole fleet of Jenkins file examples, from really basic hello world stuff all the way through to using credentials, pushing to Elastic Beanstalk, doing parallel builds, lots of different things. And all of those are run on a nightly basis. And if anything is broken on our instance, then we can catch it early, because our instance gets updated first. Does that help? Right, so shared libraries. The question is, how do we handle our shared libraries and handle testing that, make sure we don't break things with the shared library updates. So yes, there are things where like the Jenkins sandbox gets in the way. We have shared libraries to be able to handle various functions, like setting descriptions on other builds, getting statuses, or getting causes. We make a commitment to our developers that what we put in the shared library we will keep as a stable API. We do that through the global variable interface. Within our fleet of examples of Jenkins files, one of those examples covers every single method in our shared library, creating Jira tickets, destroying Jira tickets, pushing to branches, and so on. And again, those are, because they're part of our fleet of examples, run every single night. So a Jenkins server's up, believe it or not, and we're just building the Jenkins node at the moment. It'll be up in a moment. It's configured to talk to GitHub, somewhere in there. Project Hogarth J. There I am. There I am. So that's my GitHub account. It's going to magically appear to you in a moment. And Jenkins is up nearly. There we go. So this is where I got distracted writing articles, and then it will actually carry on. No. So this was from a completely fresh, empty CentOS instance. Without me ever going clicky. There is a full Jenkins server here that is talking to GitHub. There's my GitHub account. That has got a Jenkins node. In our real world, it actually connects quickly. This is me hurrying things up. And within that Jenkins account, processing the repositories actually, that have Jenkins files. So I'm going to go into there now with my magic hand. There we go. It's there. It's building. So without me ever actually touching this Jenkins server myself, there's my test scenario, and it's building from Jenkins file, and there it is. So the key thing about this build is that from a completely empty CentOS 7 instance, I've got a full server. I can enable whatever repos I want, and if I've got a Jenkins file, it will automatically pick that up and then run the builds, whatever they are. And that's a key part of what we have here over at YNAP with Bitbucket and the Bitbucket plugin. Once the project is associated with the Jenkins server at one time, we're hands off. Our development teams create repos as they need. Whichever branch has a Jenkins file, it will just detect and run with it, which makes our lives so much easier. So as you can see here, everything on a second run is idempotent safe. And we run that every day, and it's nice and safe. So you're asking about containers in the future. So yeah, so over the past couple of weeks, we've been reviewing how we do upgrades. We were clicky on upgrades. As of a couple of weeks ago, we're scripted on our upgrades now, including plugins, which makes life a lot easier. We have internally the question on how persistent our vial of Jenkins needs to be. Can we blow it away entirely? We haven't tested that yet. To be honest, we're a little bit scared of testing it on some of our Jenkins servers. And if we can make that completely transient, we'll be even happier. But we need to test that. I had a question earlier out there about the nodes. So as I mentioned, we have currently a couple of static Jenkins nodes with Docker containers. We want to kill that off. We want to move to completely transient nodes that only appear when required. And we're experimenting with Kubernetes for that, which I'm really looking forward to the next talk. And right now, which is why I had to do a video, our underlying infrastructure is not fully automated. We have to manually clicky in VMware to get a VM that doesn't work. So that's a big part of our next part of our roadmap, making that automated for us as well, so that our Jenkins servers are truly ephemeral wherever they are. If you want to steal my playbook, thank you, Callum, for letting me do this. Up there is a almost complete collection of our Groovy. And that video directly ran that playbook. So you can grab that and build your own automated Jenkins quite happily. Within that repo, if you look in roles Jenkins scripts, that's where all of our Groovy files are. You'll find lots of lovely Groovy code. And plugging myself, this is my blog, which gets articles from time to time, and I just published more detail about this talk, including code snippets up on there. And we've already had some of those. Any last questions and answers? Hello? Huh? Where's the shrimp? He's there. Oh, that's my personal project. I can't take the shrimp home with me as much as I'd like to. It's a very cuddly shrimp. Yes? Nope. So in that back there, that you'll see in the roles directory, there is a Jenkins role, there is a Jenkins node role. Those two are interlinked if you're going to be using a static node. Where the Jenkins node assumes that Jenkins has been run first. Outside of that, like I said, I don't have Docker in there, just because this is for the demo. But you can probably steal that from elsewhere in my GitHub repo somewhere. But yeah, that's if you just run that, you'll have Jenkins talking to GitHub, processing repositories, just straight off. Hi. So how long does it take to run, and what problems do we see? Oh. Cool. Actually, I've been really surprised, and happily so, about the stability of these plugins. Outside of there's 3 occasions where we've had to hold off releases until we had an upstream issue fixed, and 2 where we had to update our Groovy code. So Active Directory plugin got a change early last year-ish in how it expected its arguments in the Groovy code. Not too big a deal to fix, but it broke, and we were able to catch that. The Bitbucket was the big one, because when they first introduced that plugin, it was a copy-paste of a GitHub plugin, where they'd literally gone copy-paste and changed names. And then there was a big refactor mid-last year, where they introduced something called the SCM API, and then lots of refactoring happened, and they got some shared code, which is good, because more testing. But it did mean we had to change how we did some of our stuff. And the Artifactory plugin, about 2 months ago, broke when new security filters were added in Jenkins, up in the Jenkins side. But on the JFrog side with the Artifactory plugin, they hadn't caught up with that yet. And as a result, no one could push or pull to Artifactory. Well, we couldn't until there was an upstream fix. And then, of course, we just rolled that downstream as quickly as we could. Any other questions? One question. Last question. Anyone? Over here. Yeah, sorry. Hi. Yep. So we were quite fortunate when we engaged this project. One of the agreements we had at the start was we weren't going to do migrations as part of it ourselves, that there would be no clicky anymore, and that we as a team are on hand when a development team wants to engage to move from legacy over to still current, and that we will help them with any difficulties they have writing the Jenkins files. We'll give them workshops on that. We've run multiple workshops to teach how to do a Jenkins file, what the logic is, and yeah, we provide assistance as and when required there. But we ourselves step away from the migration itself, and the Project Mantis Shrimp was a effectively clean build implementation where we were able to say, okay, we're starting anew, and teams that want to migrate, we will help you migrate. And we've had some pretty good success there. We've had a lot of take up. So since our old Jenkins servers are 1 point something ancient that everyone's scared of, they don't even have the concept of pipelines. So yeah, so on their projects, when we brought them over from Stash to Bitbucket, as part of that, they needed to look at what jobs they had and write Jenkins files to create a workflow that accomplished what they had before. Thank you very much. everyone, and I hope that was informative and helpful.